Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Well, hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, coming from that really super rainy planet Eradu, I believe, from Rogue One. That's right, where all it did was rain, and we have no idea where we are. But I am just one of your hosts, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is every single episode, to your audio enjoyment, the one and only John Mills.
You know, I really think the X-Wings and TIE Fighters could have benefited from windshield wipers. Sort of an invention I would have expected to be in Star Wars by this point, but just something. I mean, like, or did they just, you know, because we have products like Rain-X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not an endorsement
No.
unless the Rain-X people want to fund the show a little bit.
There you go.
Or maybe even give us a star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts, which we would appreciate. Rain-X people, any people, go ahead and drop that off for us. We would love that.
Well, if you want to give us a star rating review on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. Go over there and do that. Of course, you can find us all over social media. We are on X Twitter under the Jedi Masters. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party with the entire network. You can find us online at thenerdparty.com as well and see all the shows we're doing. You got Instagram. You can follow us over at The Nerd Party. And so I think that's all of the places that you can find us. We'd really appreciate it if you did. But John, we were batting ideas back and forth, kind of like houses being batted back and forth in a hurricane. And you had brought up this idea that I thought was really interesting, and partly because of where we are in age. We're just different enough in age where this could be a classic question to be able to discuss, which is, would Star Wars be the same without the merchandising? And so opening that up, I'd love to hear, you know, how you approach that, because, I mean, it's something that's very different for many people depending on when they found Star Wars.
Very true. I'll come at it. The first part of the argument is Star Wars comes out. It's a phenom in 1977. There were other movies that were phenomenons, but Star Wars was something special. We all know the history, blah, blah, blah. Like, seriously, like, I don't think that they could make any more, you know, like, it always blows my mind when something like Star Wars Archives by Paul Duncan comes out. I'm like, how the hell have I gone this long without seeing a picture like this? You know, like, there's something from the archive that I haven't seen before. I'm like, J.W. Rinsler's books had stuff that I'd never seen before, despite all of the documenting of everything that had gone on. So it always blows my mind. But they always talk about how the merchandising was big, how people had to wait for the action figures. Kenner wasn't ready for it, that sort of thing. But once the merchandising hit, it was everywhere. And the thing is, there were unlicensed things. It was a lot harder to patrol this back then. There were unlicensed things that you could get, or things that were like Star Wars, but not quite Star Wars. You know, laser sword instead of lightsaber, or ray gun instead of Han Solo's blaster. You wanted the real thing, but you would deal with the, you know, the methadone of it all until the official stuff would come out. And I think that the thing I always fall back on, and I've fallen back on it so much that a lifelong friend of mine, Joey, hates when I pull this one out all the time. But I knew what an X-Wing was before The Empire Strikes Back came out. I'd seen an X-Wing. I knew it was called X-Wing. And the only reason I knew it was called X-Wing, or Y-Wing for that matter, was because of the merchandising. There is so much about Star Wars that was not stated on screen because it wasn't essential that we found out through the merchandising.
Right.
And so I think that sort of thing, it supported the film in such an integral way and ensured its accessibility and memorability, especially in that key formative 77 through 83 phase.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fascinating thing. And so I mentioned this on purpose, is that we're just different enough in age. And so where the merchandising hits us is different. And so when I saw the films, one of the most interesting parts of that was that there was no merchandise unless you had friends that had the merchandise from when the movies had come out. Because the merchandising, unlike today, it didn't just last. It wasn't just everywhere all the time, right? And I think that's the thing that makes this really interesting, is because I, who would have loved to have had Star Wars merchandise all over the place to play with once I saw the films on, VHS, I didn't have it. But like you mentioned, it's the other merchandising that really grabbed my interest. Because there weren't a ton of toys for me to play with, guess what I got into? The books. Because those became the things that we could hold on to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just one of the most fascinating parts of this, in that really, again, the merchandising and the way in which, George Lucas saw this is just utterly fascinating to me. And I love that he did, because it allowed me to grab hold of the saga and keep with it, even though there weren't TV shows, there weren't other ways to watch the movies other than VHS, there weren't animated series coming out. I mean, by the time I was watching, Droids and Ewoks were over, it's not like you could go and find those anywhere.
No,
and so
you can,
I mean,
not until Disney Plus.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. 100%. And so, but things like comics, things like guides to the movies. I remember one of my favorite parts of merchandising was the picture storybook of Return of the Jedi that I got from the library. Mm-hmm. Absolutely obsessed with it, John. Absolutely obsessed, because it had stills from the movie, so I could relive the movie. And then, you had like the storybook on get this, 78, so you could listen to that. So
Right.
all the things that it's so funny because all the things that you're mentioning, right, are those things that a slightly older fan was getting into because they were really starting to explore the movie. What it allowed me to do was be able to relive the movie, and then, bam, 91, the Heir to the Empire comes out, and it is like nirvana for me as a Star Wars fan. And so when I think about the way in which the merchandising hit both of us, it's so interesting because it allowed you to dig in deeper. And what it allowed me to do is just kind of almost keep it in my personal zeitgeist for longer, and really make those stories a part of me. And so, yeah, I think, the way in which the merchandising affects Star Wars beyond any of the other series that we know is pretty incredible.
See, I think that I like the way you come at that, because it is easy to forget, especially in modern times, that there was a fallow period of Star Wars merchandising. You had to really seek it out. You had to be in the comic book shop for the West End Games D6 rule book. You had to be Bill Slavicsek, my hero forever, by the way. But you had to be there for the West End Games. You had to seek things out.
Yep.
And it was difficult until the early 90s. But then I think one of the real brilliant moves to test the waters is, now you've got me thinking about the waves. The original trilogy, that merchandising really kept us in it as well, but also allowed us to dig in. That's an X-Wing. That's a Y-Wing. That's an AT-AT Walker. They never say AT-AT Walker on there. And anybody that says it's AT, I will refer you to the original commercial, because that's what I grew up with, y'all. So AT-AT Walker, the Scout Walker, all of those things. And that's sort of the brilliance, is what you're talking about with the picture book and then the other books, is that stuff was all the source material that you realize wasn't necessary for the films to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the lesson that modern movies forget, is that you don't need to say what the thing is on screen. It can just be a ship. It can just be a this or that. You don't need to specify things in a, forgive me for putting it this way, a Star Trek sort of way, where you're talking about, the phased isolipters are falling out of sync with the warp dichotomy. So what? No, doesn't matter. Like, ship go, buy toy if you want to learn about ship, sort of thing. But in terms of those waves, I think what that triggers for me is Shadows of the Empire being that movie without a movie, I think allowed them to confirm how they could maneuver in the world, whether those channels were still viable to them.
Exactly.
And definitely teed up what they saw possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also argue that, I know you came in as a newer fan, but I think also Shadows of the Empire was a great test bed, because it proved that the slightly older fans like myself, we started having discretionary income, and without a movie, because that's the thing that holds them back over time. That's why merchandising died out after Return of the Jedi. It's like, well, nobody's going to buy stuff if there aren't any movies coming out. Mm-hmm. And then they release all of this stuff and people snap it up and they go, oh, I think that was possibly the final test to make sure that the prequels were a viable product, if you will, was to prove that there was a sign of life still out there. And then additionally, I mean, think about the impulse that's burned in there, though, that everybody, basically the toys are totems. It's a visual totem, so you can look at it and have that dopamine rush of, ooh, I like that thing. That thing makes me, I have the Micro Galaxy Imperial shuttle from Return of the Jedi on my shelf, because every time I look at it, it's a little dopamine hit of remembering Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And my Lego TIE Interceptor too. Why is it that Star Wars figured that out so completely would be, I guess, the next part of the question, because of the fact that we have huge hit movies. Avatar was the $2 billion movie without a toy line. Do you know any kid playing with Avatar toys?
No.
Right. So that's my question, is what is it about Star Wars' merchandising? Is it just that the material lends itself so natively to the merchandising? Or is it just that the merchandising engine behind Star Wars, arguably pre-Disney, because the Disney machine operates differently than Lucasfilm did previous to the purchase? I'm not throwing shade. I'm just saying that, okay, so two parts. What is it about the movies that make them so natively able to be merchandised, at least in the old days? But then also, what do you think made it so different when Lucasfilm was an independent company? Why does it feel different, the merchandising now, than it did then? Why? It feels different, doesn't it?
No, I think, okay, so I have a lot of thoughts running around in my head as we're discussing this, because I think one of the things that you kind of nailed there in your conversation, and what this did for you, is it allowed you to experience the film in a new way, in the sense that by giving you all of these new things to learn about what was on screen, it enhanced your viewing, and therefore made the desire to kind of be back in the universe and just watch what had already come out really big, right? Anytime we talk about anything EU here, expanded universe or anything like that, we always talk about this idea of the way in which that thing makes you understand the film in a different way and enhances your viewing of the film, right? And so the moment that you knew that they were X-Wings, that made you more interested in the world. It made it more real. It made it feel more like a cohesive universe and not just a film. Like it made it feel, George Lucas always talks about the idea is that Star Wars is basically like found footage from a universe far, far away. And so I think that's the thing that made all of that expanded universe material for you, all that merchandising material for you so important, right? And so I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that maybe just makes it different, and I don't know if I'm right on this, but I think that made it different is that they were the first people to do it and they stumble into it as a mistake. Like George Lucas took a chance that merchandising could be big here. Nobody had ever done this before, but he was like, I'll take this, and on the off chance it works, great. And of course, we all know it worked like gangbusters, right? And so I think that there's something in that makes it feel different because it was just this guerrilla marketing campaign for this little film that nobody had heard of and everybody thought would probably bomb, and it becomes this juggernaut. And then kids have the ability to be able to immerse themselves in that universe with toys for it. And then older fans like yourself get the opportunity to immerse themselves in it with material that allows them to feel like they understand the movies on a whole new level, and you're hitting every single fan of the film where you need to hit them. And that was like lightning in a bottle, right? And we've never had that again because, well, everybody then picked up the same train and it just became the norm. And with Star Wars, it was something new and fresh and different. And I think that's the thing that just kind of made it different. And I think that's why, Star Wars fans in general are people who, look at both of our offices that we're sitting in as we record. They're full of Star Wars memorabilia. And each part and each piece of memorabilia has a memory for us or a way in which it helps us connect to that thing that we love. That's, it is even different for me than just, and I think you mentioned the other Star franchise. The closest one probably is Star Trek when it comes to, when you could hold a communicate in your hand, right? Or when you could hold the, what was the Mego toys, that had come out? Those kind of things, right? And what's interesting too is like you think about that is, Star Trek in some ways does help pave the way for that. And maybe George Lucas was just paying attention and was like, I think fans want this. And if people like this movie, they're going to want to have a piece of it. And so, but like, the maverick that he is, he took a chance on an unknown idea and ran with it. And, now we're in a place where it's hard to imagine Star Wars. I'm even wearing a Bad Batch shirt right now.
As all right-thinking people should.
Exactly. Because of this, this absolute love for this franchise.
Well, it goes so well that Spaceballs has one of its best routines with yogurt, just plain yogurt. It's like the merchandising, right? It's Spaceballs the flamethrower. The kids love this one. And I think that I think what this definitely proves is that this is why I think Star Wars now is encountering some of the cultural difficulty that it did not before, is because setting aside every other argument about the pre and post Disney era and everything like that, is we live in an era where the boards take it too much for granted that it has to have a merchandising piece. And so they will make decisions about the advertising.
Yeah.
I think not the advertising, about the merchandising. I think that the thing that made Star Wars so unique pre-Disney is that it was, I'm going to make what movie I want to, and then I will merchandise whatever the hell I want to out of it. As opposed to something more mercenary out of a corporate setting that we can all sort of sniff out, where it's like Independence Day, actually in the 1990s. Remember that advertising blitz for, sorry, I keep saying advertising, but I mean, merchandising is basically advertising.
Yeah.
But like the merchandising blitz for Independence Day was the same idea, flood the market with toys. And I remember looking at them and I was like, it bounced off of me because it suddenly made things that like there was, I don't know why it is that the merchandising for Star Wars always seems so special. It always seems so meaningful. And I think it's because the core story wasn't dictated by what they thought they could sell, which is both merchandising and advertising when you think about it. It's like, why are we making these creative decisions? Because we can sell, because we can merchandise, because we can do that. Whereas, I mean, tell me if I'm off my rocker, because I would say that the inverse happened with Star Wars, where it was like, I'm going to make this and it works and people like it. So fine, I'll merchandise these aspects of it because people like it, as opposed to cynically putting it together at the development phase. You know, am I making sense?
No, I think
that?
you're making complete sense. Again, I think that what we end up with is the real difference here between everything else was that, you know, this was a gamble. And of course, you know, the gamble pays off. And so now it's just the norm as what everybody does. And, you know, obviously, George Lucas is working to make money because in the end, too, you know, the beauty of this is that, you know, without the merchandising, we wouldn't get any of the other films. You know, the merchandising is actually what, you know, saved Star Wars and allowed him to then make Star Wars the way he wanted and to do a bunch of other things, you know. And so I think that's the other part of this that you asked, how is this different than the other franchises? How is this different than the ways in which we see this happening, you know, in other places? And, you know, one of the main reasons I think this is different, John, is that George Lucas took the money and he poured it not only back into his franchise, but he poured it back into his love of filmmaking and his love of changing the dynamic of what we could do on film because of technology. And that, I think, is what sets him and Star Wars apart, is because the merchandising became a way of giving back, not just to himself, but to everyone. Because movies wouldn't be the way that they are without George Lucas taking a gamble on merchandising, which allows him to then make the films he wants to make, invest in technology so he can make the films that he wants to make, and allow that technology then to be able to benefit everybody else. I mean, you think about even the ways in which ILM became a powerhouse that helped other franchises, like Star Trek, like Back to the Future, like you think of what they did and the work that they did on Jurassic Park. And I mean, just all of these things. And all of that happens because George Lucas isn't stingy with the money he makes from the merchandising. He actually just gives that back. And I think, and to top it all off, the man sells Lucasfilm and gives away a ton of that money, and then creates a museum to celebrate what he loves, which is film, that people can go to. And so I think that's the difference, man.
I think that is a great point to end on. And I'll add one sentence to that, because I love the way you're painting that, because I think it does speak exactly to this sort of core difference that we sense on some sort of lizard brain level. This core level is that essentially we're the stockholders. The toys that we bought were stock investments in this empire that he built to deliver more movies to us that we wanted to see. So instead of sitting on a board and buying a piece of paper, we bought a little totem of the thing that we loved, and then that became the thing that we would later see develop back in on us. So I think that's awesome. And so I think if anybody wants to discuss this with you online further, where else can they speak with you?
People can check me out all over the place on social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, here on the network, I've got a completed show called Owlposts with Dre Kaufman, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You can also find me over on the TFN network with a bunch of shows, including the 602 Club, which is a general geek show where we talk about all of the fandoms that we love. So hopefully people will join us there. And John, you're a frequent guest. And last but not least, we just like you to give us a star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts.
And you can find me right here on the Nerd Party Network for House Lights with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, where we talk about the different works of directors. We recently celebrated 200 episodes, which is a milestone. And on top of that, you can just find me out there working with Matt.
But John, I think it's time to close these negotiations, because I hear the chimes over at the Jedi Temple calling us for meditation.
Well, then let's go meditate and see what type of trouble we can conjure. Master Rushing, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.